Word on the street had it that the illustrious General Wei Qing had returned from the frontier with a ravishing beauty in tow. In the Golden Hall, the atmosphere hung heavy. His Majesty, in his imperial magnanimity, asked what reward the general desired. The general knelt ramrod straight, his voice resonating through the chamber, requesting but two things: to dissolve his betrothal to me, the Prime Minister's daughter, and permission to wed the woman who held his heart. Upon hearing this, the emperor seemed tickled by some private jest, his dragon countenance brightening considerably. With a flourish, he issued 3 imperial edicts, one granting the dissolution, another blessing the new union, and a third den commanding that I be conveyed to the palace in an 8-bearer palanquin. On the day of my palace entry within those towering vermilion walls, I raised my hand with unprecedented resolve and removed the gossamer veil that had concealed my face for years. A chorus of sharp intakes of breath rippled through the assembly. General Wei Qing, previously lost in his own thoughts, now looked as though his eyes might pop clean out of his head. Only the young emperor wore an expression of smug satisfaction. He swept aside the obstructive eunuch at my side, extended his arm, and drew me possessively into his embrace. Turning to the assembly of dumbstruck ministers below, he announced with undisguised pride, "Why do you all stand there gawping like landed fish? Make your obeisance to your imperial noble consort. I was but a slip of a girl when I toddled uninvited into father's sanctum sanctorum. Upon entering, I discovered some urchin of indeterminate origin perched brazenly atop father's prized rosewood chair, then the very one he treated like a religious relic. The little wretch clutched a freshly ground ink stick and was gleefully defacing father's painstakingly completed landscape painting, reducing it to an unrecognizable mess. Even at that tender age, my temper ran hot. I couldn't abide such sacrilege. I charged forward, seized his wrist, and declared my intention to haul him before the magistrate. The boy proved surprisingly strong. In our tussle, someone's sleeve caught the candle stand. A tremendous crash followed as the heavy inkstone toppled, striking the boy squarely on the forehead and knocking him senseless. Flames leapt along the paper, and we nearly became a pair of roasted ducks in that study. Heaven knows where I found the strength, but I somehow dragged that dead-weight boy then limp as a sack of potatoes from the encroaching inferno. Barely had I caught my breath when I encountered mother's horrified gaze and father's ashen face, looking ready to faint dead away that very day. Father Zen, who had always indulged my every whim, didn't spare me so much as a glance. He scooped up the unconscious boy and bolted from the room as though the hounds of hell were at his heels. And I was his precious pearl, his treasured daughter, aggrieved beyond measure. I clutched mother's sleeve and wailed like a banshee, snot and tears flowing freely as I demanded to know if that wild child was father's illegitimate spawn. Before I could finish my accusation, mother's hand connected smartly with the back of my head. Worse still, the ink from the overturned stone had splattered across my face. When my tears mixed with it, I resembled nothing so much as a chimney sweep Zen streaked black and white in equal measure. Upon catching my reflection, I let loose an ear-splitting shriek, convinced I'd been permanently disfigured. The incident spread like wildfire. The Ruan household teemed with loose-lipped servants, and within days the tale had grown elaborate embellishments. By the time it reached the streets, everyone knew that the right side of my face had been hideously burned. Within 3 days, all of the capital had heard. Prime Minister Ruan's only daughter had suffered divine retribution and been utterly disfigured. But heaven as my witness, it was merely indelible ink. I scrubbed at my face with a loofah sponge until my skin was raw as a baboon's backside, weeping golden tears all the while. What on earth was that ink made of? Why wouldn't it budge? I'd practically abraded a layer of skin, yet those black stains remained steadfast as a mountain. When father returned and witnessed my self-inflicted torture, he snatched up the feather duster, fully prepared to give this unfilial daughter a blooming backside. Fortunately, mother intervened with lightning reflexes. Father could only stand before the charred remains of his study, gazing at my patchwork face and heaving great sighs. It transpired that the ink stick had cost him tens of thousands of taels of silver Zen premium tribute ink from the western regions, notorious for penetrating skin and resisting removal. He'd never imagined I'd waste it all. Unable to bear my caterwauling any longer, Mother waved her hand and instructed the maids to provide me with thick veils. Since the stains wouldn't wash off, I'd simply have to cover them. The ink would fade naturally within a month or so anyway. Who could have predicted that the very next day, my carefree nature would reassert itself? Veiled and all, I swanned out to purchase the latest hairpins. This sealed my fate. Seeing me so thoroughly covered, the populace took it as confirmation of my disfigurement. I attempted to explain, but the moment I opened my mouth, everyone adopted that infuriating I completely understand expression. Even the princess, who usually competed with me for everything, now regarded me with pitying benevolence, magnanimously yielding the hairpin I'd fancied. This truly wasn't my fault. Father's exorbitantly expensive ink was simply too high quality. I wore that veil for a full month before daring to remove it. However, the heavens seemed determined to make sport of me. Just as the ink stains faded, I disturbed a hornet's nest, and my face swelled like risen dough. No sooner had the swelling subsided than I mistakenly consumed almonds, breaking out in a dense rash of angry red welts. Once the allergic reaction cleared, I played hide and seek with friends and collided headfirst with a doorframe, knocking out both front teeth. Mother began to suspect I'd been cursed by some malevolent spirit. Why else would every injury spare the rest of my body yet target my face with such precision? Thus that veil became a permanent fixture, never to be removed again. Father would gaze at me and sigh deeply, lecturing that a young lady's face was her fortune. And how could I be so careless, behaving like a hoyden? As for the boy I'd brained that day, then he vanished without a trace afterward. I promptly forgot all about him. Strategic commentration, the social nullification of the protagonist's beauty value. But observe the hidden assets, that unconscious boy, the life-saving grace, and that bottle of premium ink creating years of identity concealment. These seemingly unrelated fragments will become lethal weapons in subsequent power plays. Suppression index 35%. Continuing observation. Time flows like water, and before I knew it, I'd reached the age of the hairpin ceremony. In my 15th year, the newly enthroned young emperor Zhen, whether from excessive leisure or sheer boredom, Zhen issued an utterly unexpected marriage decree in my name. As the saying goes, civil and military officials occupy separate spheres. Father, as prime minister and head of all civil servants, should never have been allied with military families through marriage. Yet this young emperor, whether suffering a mental aberration or harboring ulterior motives, took up his brush and decreed my betrothal to the renowned divine marshal general. Was he truly unconcerned about these two joining forces in rebellion, or did he possess inexplicable confidence in father's and the general's loyalty? Imperial commands brook no defiance. Once the edict was issued, the matter was settled. I heard that General Wei Qing petitioned the throne repeatedly to refuse the marriage, kowtowing until his forehead bled, yet failed to persuade the emperor to rescind his command. I took a rather philosophical view. In this era, one husband was much like another, then so long as he wasn't a 40-year-old balding pot-belly. I'd accept my fate. I dispatched people to gather intelligence. My requirements for this future husband were modest, merely that he not be some decrepit middle-aged specimen. The scouts reported that this general, named Wei Qing, came from a distinguished military lineage. He'd accompanied his father to war at 13, and though barely 17 now, had already demonstrated remarkable tactical brilliance on the battlefield. Inheriting his father's martial prowess, he'd been personally designated Divine Marshal General by imperial decree. Hearing this, I patted my chest in relief. Thank goodness, then a young hero, not some wizened old goat. However, the scouts appended a tidbit of gossip. This young General Wei was a severe beauty enthusiast, his eye caught only by exceptional looks. To ensure future domestic tranquility and avoid mutual revulsion, I resolved to give the general a preview of my true countenance. The opportunity soon presented itself. I learned that in 3 days the palace would host a banquet, with General Wei Qing among the invited guests. Examining my reflection, I could only conclude that today the title of bewitching temptress was mine alone. Regarding that shimmering iridescent ensemble, I felt rather like a peacock preparing to display its plumage. My personal maid Xiao Ju stood beside me, Practically drooling, Xiao Ju, wake up, wipe that drool from your chin. I reminded her helplessly. Xiao Ju hastily dabbed at her mouth, her expression besotted. Miss, you're absolutely celestial today. What a pity outsiders remain in the dark, still claiming that the Vice Minister of Personnel's daughter is the capital's foremost beauty. In my opinion, she couldn't match your little toe. I rolled my eyes and poked her forehead. Enough with the flattery. This is called playing possum to catch the tiger. Understand? It is tactical Zen, saving the grand reveal for maximum impact. Adjusting my robes, I solemnly replaced the veil and boarded the carriage bound for the palace banquet. Indeed, my plan was flawless. I would engineer a seemingly accidental moment at the banquet, allowing Wei Qing a glimpse of my peerless beauty through the veil, whereupon he'd fall hopelessly, helplessly in love. Once married, I'd have him eating from my hand, free to live as I pleased. Alas, ideals prove plump whilst reality delivers a stinging slap. I remained far too naive. The banquet had been underway for some time before the newly installed young emperor deigned to make his entrance. Draped in a snow-white fox fur cloak, he moved with languid grace, eventually settling himself upon the dragon throne. Rise, beloved ministers, forgive the delay. Observing that youthful, spirited face tinged with casual indifference, who could believe this sovereign wielding power over life and death throughout the realm was my contemporary Zan, a mere 15 years old. The emperor's eyes, carrying a hint of mockery, swept across the assembly below before he settled into his elevated seat and began sipping wine. I stared at the steaming dishes before him, then at my own table's thoroughly chilled remnants, seething with indignation. Arriving so tardily was bad enough, but causing this young lady to miss even a single hot dish. Still, I couldn't afford such culinary concerns at present. My attention had locked onto Wei Qing, resplendent in black official robes, sitting with impeccable posture. Well, I had to admit, the fellow cut a rather dashing figure with those sword-like brows and starry eyes. I stared at him for the duration of half an incense stick, my eyes nearly cramping, yet the wretch didn't spare me even a peripheral glance. I clenched my fists within my sleeves, silently cursing. Little upstart, playing the gentleman are we? Just wait until I bewitch you senseless. I endured the inedible cold fare, then suffered through soporific song and dance performances. Finally, I seized my chance. Wei Qing rose and departed toward the rear gardens. My heart leapt. I slipped away in stealthy pursuit. Who knew the imperial palace was so confoundingly vast? Not only did I lose my quarry, but I became thoroughly lost in the labyrinthine pathways. Worse was yet to come. Just as I wandered about like a headless chicken, the temperature plummeted, and a peculiar wind arose from nowhere. Achoo! I couldn't suppress a resounding sneeze. In that instant, the mysterious gust snatched the veil from my face and kicked up a cloud of dust that invaded my eyes. As I clutched at my stinging eyes, a pair of warm hands gently patted my shoulder. I leapt like a cat whose tail had been trodden upon, flailing my arms defensively whilst demanding, "Who goes there?" My eyes burned too painfully to open, leaving me swinging blindly. Miss, no need for alarm. 'Tis this humble servant. Hearing that high-pitched yet gentle voice, my suspended heart returned to its proper place. Judging by the timbre, this must be the Grand Eunuch who served at the Emperor's side. This Grand Eunuch enjoyed a sterling reputation for treating people kindly. I'd heard his companion Zan, a palace maid Zan, had once received kindness from my family, establishing a connection of sorts. This humble daughter greets the Grand Eunuch. Forgive my discourtesy. I covered my eyes whilst attempting to maintain proper deportment. I am the only daughter of Prime Minister Ruan. I came here to admire the scenery when a sudden wind blinded me, leaving me unable to find my way. Might I trouble the eunuch to retrieve my veil and guide me back to the banquet? Otherwise, father will worry. An eerie silence followed. With no response forthcoming, the cold wind prompted another sneeze, and I shivered involuntarily. Eunuch, I ventured tentatively. The next moment, I felt a pair of exceptionally warm hands gently replacing my veil. Then a thick fur cloak, still carrying body heat, draped across my shoulders, instantly dispelling the surrounding chill. Miss Ron, I must trouble you to take my arm. This servant shall escort you back to the banquet." The voice seemed deliberately lowered. I exhaled in relief and expressed my gratitude. Then I must impose upon the eunuch. I carefully grasped that solid, muscular arm and proceeded forward. Gradually, the banquet's cacophony reached my ears. My maid Xiao Ju, sharp-eyed as ever, spotted me being escorted by the grand eunuch from afar. Terrified, she came running at full tilt. "Greetings, grand eunuch. I am Miss Rowan's maid, Xiao Ju. What has befallen my mistress?" Xiao Ju frantically took me from the person's hands. "Your mistress got dust in her eyes in the rear garden. She should wash them thoroughly. The side hall has been prepared with warm water and ginger tea to ward off chills. Miss Ruan appears somewhat affected by the cold, then this mustn't be taken lightly." The person offered detailed instructions. I gripped Xiao Ju's hand tightly. Only when my taut nerves finally relaxed did I curtsy in the direction of the voice. "This daughter is deeply grateful for the eunuch's great kindness. After washing my eyes with warm water in the side hall and being force-fed a bowl of ginger tea so bitter it contorted my features beyond maternal recognition, I changed into fresh garments and returned to the banquet. Looking up, I saw Wei Qing seated in his original position, drinking and toasting with flushed cheeks. Infuriating, the scoundrel had bolted like a rabbit, causing me to lose him and suffer such indignity. To execute today's love-at-first-sight stratagem, I'd deliberately worn a gossamer thin celestial gown and nearly frozen into an icicle in that garden zen all for naught, without even showing him my face. Just as I ground my teeth in frustration, I felt a scorching gaze upon me. Instinctively looking up, I met the Emperor's playful eyes from his elevated position. Every hair on my body stood on end as I wondered, what is this about? Why is this wretched Emperor staring at me? In a flash of horrified realization, I noticed then the Emperor's snow-white fox fur cloak had vanished. A chill shot from my feet to my crown. My mind raced in terror. Could it be just now in the rear garden? Had that grand eunuch stolen the Emperor's fur to use privately? Then, encountering me, had he draped it over me to frame me for the theft? I mentally kicked myself. Why hadn't I examined the cloak's material and style more carefully? Fortunately, most fortunately, finding the cloak too heavy, I'd casually left it on the side. Hall's couch thinking this, I forced myself to remain composed and returned the Emperor's gaze with a hint of smugness. Far from anger, his eyes deepened with amusement. He regarded me meaningfully before beckoning the grand eunuch and whispering instructions. An ominous premonition enveloped me. Sure enough, the Emperor lounging on his dragon throne opened his golden mouth, his voice quiet yet authoritative. "Minister Ruan." The previously noisy hall fell instantly silent, then so quiet one could hear a fly's wing beats. My old man tremulously emerged from his seat, walked to the hall's center, and dropped to his knees with a resounding thud. "This minister is present." The Emperor said nothing, merely gazing at father with that half-mocking expression. The atmosphere congealed to an extreme zen one could hear a pin drop. I even noticed father's arch-rivals, then the Grand Tutor and Vice Minister of Personnel, then huddled together, exchanging gleeful glances. Father knelt on the ground, perspiration pouring down, his official robes nearly soaked through. I sat below, equally on edge, unable to fathom what medicine this wretched Emperor was selling. Could he be targeting my family? Just as the stifling air became unbearable, the Emperor suddenly propped his chin on one hand and emitted an utterly inappropriate chuckle. Heh. Today, within these palace walls, we encountered an old acquaintance not seen for many days. She is, moreover, our life-saving benefactor. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. "Minister Ruan, how do you suppose we should lavishly reward her?" I was utterly bewildered, looking toward father in confusion. Father's body trembled as though suddenly enlightened to some celestial secret. The civil and military officials and their families exchanged glances, craning their necks to learn the identity of this mysterious old acquaintance. Without a word, father began kowtowing with resounding thuds. "Your Majesty, this matter, this minister cannot decide." The Emperor acted as though he hadn't understood father's refusal, responding with apparent irrelevance. "Why such agitation, Minister Ruan? We never said you were our benefactor." He lazily shifted position and continued. It is merely that this benefactor is modest and unwilling to claim credit. As it happens, the kingdom of Liuli recently sent tribute, including many rare treasures. We thought to bestow these all upon our benefactor. Would Minister Ruan be so kind as to deliver them on our behalf? I stole a glance at the emperor, who still wore that half-asleep expression. Having uttered this pronouncement, he yawned, declared, "We are fatigued," and rose to depart the hall. He left father still kneeling in the hall's center, motionless as a stone sculpture. The moment the emperor departed, the hall erupted. Whispers surged like tidal waves. Those curious, probing, even schadenfreude-filled gazes shot toward us, father and daughter, like arrows, as though father had committed some heinous crime. This continued until the Grand Eunuch, smiling broadly, waved his whisks, and the heavy hall doors opened again as a procession of young eunuchs heaved enormous red wooden chests inside, grunting with effort. Nearly an entire incense stick's duration passed before the procession concluded. When the lids opened, the hall blazed with golden light, pearls and jewels radiating brilliance that nearly blinded my titanium alloy eyes. I stood completely stupefied, mentally screaming, "Has this wretched emperor lost his mind? Does the treasury have money to burn?" Only then did the Grand Eunuch descend the steps, personally assist father to his feet, and whisper in his ear. Father's expression underwent a spectacular transformation before settling into a helpless sigh and a heavy nod. The gazes within the hall grew even more peculiar. Some bold ministers had already begun covertly inquiring where this benefactor of the emperor's was hiding. I suspected this lot could perform Sichuan opera face, changing then their expressions shifting from green to white were more spectacular than any stage performance. News of father returning home with 5 cartloads of gold, silver, and jewels spread through the capital like wildfire, particularly that Vice Minister of Personnel's daughter, Lin Mayer, who usually mocked me as an ugly monster Zan at subsequent gatherings. She subjected me to relentless sarcastic bombardment. I calmly cleaned out my ear, treating it as mere dog barking. This nonchalant attitude infuriated her to the point of stamping her feet, nearly shredding her handkerchief. Rumors ran rampant throughout the capital, claiming father had secretly befriended the emperor's life-saving benefactor. Various factions scrambled to uncover this mysterious figure's identity. Our threshold was nearly trampled flat by those making pretextual visits. However, upon returning home, father behaved most unusually, claiming illness for several consecutive days and barring the gates. Once recovered, he began leaving at dawn and returning at moonrise. He'd rush to the palace at first light and drag himself home only when the moon hung high. When mother inquired what had transpired, he remained tight-lipped, merely looking perpetually worried. In all my years, I'd never seen the old man in such a state. Whenever he saw me, his sighs grew heavier as though I were some hot potato. The very next day, urgent reports arrived from court. The northwestern barbarians had grown restless. The frontier was in crisis. The emperor immediately issued an edict appointing Wei Qing as commander, to depart forthwith for the northwestern front. Consequently, the wedding scheduled for next month had to be postponed indefinitely. After much deliberation, though this marriage wasn't my choice, Wei Qing was departing to defend the realm. I made a special trip to Lingyin Temple to sincerely obtain a protective amulet, intending to present it to him personally before his departure, then a gesture of goodwill. At least, learning he was inspecting troops at the suburban training ground today, I brought Xiaoju along. Arriving outside the training ground, I spotted Wei Qing from afar, standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman in martial attire, both appearing focused on some military matter. I'd barely stepped forward when the guards blocked my path with crossed spears. Military zone, no unauthorized persons permitted. Xiaoju, indignant, planted her hands on her hips. Open your dog eyes and look properly. This is the Prime Minister's eldest daughter. Your general's betrothed, who are you calling unauthorized? The soldier's face showed nothing but contempt. He looked us up and down and snorted coldly. Oh, so you're that pampered miss who, relying on family connections, forcibly separated the general from his true love, the military strategist. Looking at you, all delicate and precious, a gust of wind could knock you over. Best not come to this place of blades and arrows, seeking attention. should you suffer the slightest injury. We lowly soldiers couldn't afford compensation. Having our heads chopped off by the Prime Minister would be most unjust, wouldn't it? You, how dare you? Xiaoju flushed crimson with rage, ready to explode. I pulled Xiaoju back, shaking my head, then smiled at the soldier Zen, though veiled. The smile carried a chill. If that is the case, we'll simply wait here for General Wei. Though our dispute wasn't loud, it caught the attention of the pair nearby. Wei Qing turned, his brow furrowing before he spoke to the woman beside him and strode over with her in tow. Zhao, stand down. Who gave you permission for such rudeness? The woman sharply reprimanded the guard. Only then did Zhao sullenly lower his spear and step aside. Though not before rolling his eyes dramatically at us, Xiaoju trembled with fury. I covertly tugged her sleeve, then turned to Wei Qing, my gaze falling on the woman beside him. And this is before Wei Qing could introduce her. The woman stepped forward, clasping her fists in a forthright salute. Greetings, Miss Round. I am Murong Wangti, military strategist under the General's command. She then turned to Wei Qing with a radiant smile, her tone familiar. Ah, Qing, I see Miss Round has private words for you. I'll return to the tent and await you. Wei Qing instinctively raised his hand to stop her, his tone urgent. Wangqi, no need to avoid us. Whatever Miss Ron wishes to say, she may speak here. Between you and I, there is no need for such formality. My smile froze instantly, the last ember of hope in my heart thoroughly doused by this bucket of cold water. Listen to those endearments, Jen. Ah, Qing, Wanqi. Jen, truly a pair of lovebirds with mutual affection. So I'd become the villain who broke up the happy couple. Yet this imperial edict came from the emperor himself, beyond the power of a mere woman to resist. I too felt helpless. The protective amulet in my sleeve burned uncomfortably. I suddenly realized that if I truly married this Wei Qing, my future days would be spent in endless awkwardness. Xiaoju, seeing my prolonged silence and forced smile, finally couldn't contain her sarcasm. Since that is the case, we shan't intrude further. Our Miss rose before dawn to visit the temple and obtain a protective amulet for the general. Who could have known the general already has a beauty at his side? This gesture of devotion seems quite superfluous. How pitiful that our Miss's sincere heart has been so wasted. Upon hearing this, Wei Qing's expression darkened immediately. He said sternly, Nonsense. Wangqi is the army's strategic mind. A heroine among women, then how can she be compared to ordinary females? Murong Wangqi, however, maintained a magnanimous expression, saying gently, Ah, Qing, don't be angry. It is quite all right. The corner of my mouth twitched involuntarily. Watching these two perform this deep devotion and mutual protection drama before me was more cloying than any romance novel. I glared venomously at the loose Xiaoju. This wretched girl Zen, why bring up what needn't be mentioned? Xiaoju speaks without thinking. General and military strategist Murong, please don't take offense. I merely happened to pass by with time to spare. Since the general is occupied with military affairs, I shan't delay further. We'll take our leave. I pulled the still indignant Xiaoju and turned to go Miss Ruan. Wait, Wei Qing suddenly called out from behind. I paused and turned back to see Wei Qing extending a hand, asking matter-of-factly, since you obtained it, where is this general's protective amulet? I froze momentarily, my gaze sweeping past Murong Wangqi's instantly rigid expression. Inwardly, I sneered. I'd thought that though Wei Qing resisted the marriage, he was at least an upright man, who knew that with his beloved standing right beside him, he could still be so fickle, then wanting what is in the bowl whilst eyeing what is in the pot. I feigned apologetic regret, patting my sleeve. Oh dear, how unfortunate, General Wei. The journey was rather bumpy, and the amulet seems to have been lost somewhere along the way. Since military strategist Murong is here, I'm certain she'll obtain an even better one for the general. Farewell, turning away, whilst no one watched. I casually tossed the still warm protective amulet into a nearby haystack like discarded rubbish. Strategic commentary. Note the protagonist's response strategy. She chose not to confront directly, but used the symbolic act of index. Suppression. Perhaps conscience struck, or perhaps for some other reason Zhen Weiqing sent me a letter 2 days prior. The missive was earnest, claiming he'd only just learned I'd misunderstood his relationship with Murong Wangqi. He explained they were truly merely pure colleagues, and invited me to meet at the capital's most renowned Hongyun Tower, saying he wished to apologize in person. I initially intended to toss the letter straight into the brazier, too lazy to bother with such nonsense. But on reflection, the betrothal still stood. If he truly fancied that military strategist Murong, better to lay everything on the table now. If we could reach an understanding, even if forced by imperial decree to marry, we could simply lead separate lives without interference, then I'd at least have peace. With this negotiation mindset, I deliberately arrived half an hour early at Hongyun Tower. In that private room, I waited from mid-morning until sunset. Tea replaced pot after pot. Pastries gone cold, then yet not a shadow of him appeared. Splendid. I'd been stood up. I gripped the innocent chopsticks in my hand until my knuckles whitened, teeth grinding audibly. Just as my patience reached its limit, and I rose to storm out, sounds finally came from the doorway. I'd barely mustered my aggrieved emotions when I saw the tardy Wei Qing Zand, like a conjoined twin, Murong Wangqi trailing behind him. My grievance evaporated instantly, replaced by blazing fury. I transformed into a battle-ready mother hen, drawing myself up with cold dignity. Wei Qing looked apologetic, fine beads of sweat on his brow, bowing repeatedly. "Miss Ruan, my deepest apologies for keeping you waiting." Before Wei Qing could finish, Murong Wangqi interjected, flashing me an apologetic, delicate smile. "Miss Ruan, we're truly sorry. Qing didn't mean to be late. It is just that today I accidentally injured myself at camp, and Qing was so concerned he insisted on personally fetching a physician for me, which caused the delay. If you're angry, scold or strike me as you will, then just please don't blame Qing. Listen to this. What exquisite tea ceremony performance. Fury surged through me until my liver ached. Well done, Wei Qing. Even if we lack emotional foundation, basic respect should exist, shouldn't it? You arranged to meet me, were late because of her, and now bring her along to flaunt your affection before me. I laughed coldly, my voice frosted with ice. Military strategist Murong is too kind. Though I, Ruan, may not be some great lady, I'm certainly no common shrew who'd strike or curse without cause. I turned to fix Wei Qing with a piercing stare. Wei Qing, you're at least the Emperor's personally appointed Divine Marshal General. Since you initiated this meeting, you should honor your commitment. I waited here like a fool for hours, and now you arrive late with your beloved, thinking a casual apology suffices. Your face is rather thick, isn't it? If you're dissatisfied with this marriage, speak plainly. I'm not some clingy plaster you can't shake off as though I must have you. Why resort to such methods to humiliate me? Wei Qing stood speechless, his face cycling through shades of green and red sand, quite a sight. Instead, Murong Wangqi spoke again, lowering her head with a forlorn expression, tears threatening. I'm sorry. Qing, this is all my fault. I've burdened you. Seeing this, Wei Qing immediately regarded her with heartache, his tone tender enough to drip honey. Wangqi, how could this be your fault? I was inconsiderate. He then turned to me, Miss Ruan, if you're displeased, direct it all at me. Another day, I'll personally come to the Prime Minister's residence to make proper amends. I nearly choked on my rage, mentally cursing that meddling emperor and his 18 generations of ancestors. What utter nonsense. I refused to spare these two another glance. Ignoring Wei Qing's calls from behind, I turned and left with absolute finality, not looking back once. I'd barely taken a few steps when Murong Wangqi cried out in pain behind me. Wei Qing's footsteps, which had been pursuing me, halted. I heard him expressing concern for Murong Wangqi, and I simply climbed into my carriage and headed straight home. The very next morning, Wei Qing came knocking at the Prime Minister's residence, demanding to make amends. Absurdly, he even carried a bundle of thorny branches on his back, attracting crowds of gawking commoners at our gate. Father ushered him inside. I hadn't yet told Father about these vexing matters, fearing he'd worry. Father assumed I was merely being petulant and summoned me. I had no intention of seeing him, but Father mentioned that Wei Qing had brought my favorite sugar-roasted chestnuts from the shop on West Street. I dragged Xiaoju along to witness Wei Qing's humiliation, Zan, and only for the sake of those chestnuts, mind you. Arriving at the front hall, I found Wei Qing looking utterly dejected, the thorny branches having drawn blood on his back. Father was giving me meaningful looks, silently asking what Wei Qing had done to offend me. I was momentarily speechless. Wei Qing knelt below, clumsily apologizing, then slowly extracted a wooden hairpin from his sleeve. "What is this, General?" I tilted my head, puzzled why Wei Qing was presenting me with what resembled a tree branch. Wei Qing's face immediately flushed crimson, his words stumbling. This is a wooden hairpin I carved last night, as an apology gift for Miss Ruan." Seeing him in such a state, I couldn't help but laugh aloud. Yet I hadn't forgotten how he and Murong Wangti had ganged up on me. So I composed myself and said sternly, "General Wei, the Wei family has served the nation for 3 generations, every member a loyal martyr. I only hope this legacy won't be destroyed in your hands." Wei Qing looked momentarily panicked. "This subject is terrified. I don't understand what Miss means. I came today specifically because I have an important matter to report to Miss." I flicked my sleeve. "You give me a hairpin, then won't military strategist Murong be angry? Won't she be jealous? Won't she strike me?" Wei Qing shook his head vigorously. "Miss Ruan, you misunderstand. I've never carved anything for Wangqi. She has been an orphan since childhood. Then I found her among refugees. She possesses remarkable strategic talent, which is why I promoted her to military strategist. After years together, I regard her only as a younger sister." I regarded the hairpin coldly, making no move to accept it. My sharp eyes caught sight of a familiar cord around his neck. I suddenly leaned forward and pulled it out, my fingertips accidentally grazing his throat. It was the protective amulet I'd previously thrown on the ground. Wei Qing turned red as a steamed prawn. Seeing him thus, the harsh words on my tongue somehow wouldn't emerge. He stammered I for ages without managing another sentence. Then Murong Wangqi entered, informing Wei Qing it was time to depart for the campaign. The relaxed atmosphere evaporated instantly. Wei Qing's expression transformed, becoming grave. "I must go. I still hope Miss Ruan will forgive me and accept the hairpin." So it was already time for his departure. I pressed my lips together, though Wei Qing was emotionally unreliable. His dedication to defending the realm in bloody battles remained admirable. Murong Wangqi's face had gone pale as she stared at the wooden hairpin. A belly full of mischief seized me. I pretended to wipe away non-existent tears, saying, "Since you carved it yourself, I'll accept it. Wei Qing, you must return safely." He nodded solemnly, then gave me one long, deep look before departing. Murong Wangqi followed behind him. Then who knows how long she'd been eavesdropping outside. She shot me a venomous glare. I mouthed silently at her. "Is that all you've got?" Snow fell during the 2 months Wei Qing was away. Both inside and outside the palace remained remarkably peaceful. Even the brain-addled emperor refrained from causing trouble. I sat enjoying hot pot, watching the goose feather snow, when thoughts of Wei Qing suddenly surfaced. Wei Qing must have suffered some afflictions, and instead of properly canoodling with his dear sister, he frequently sent me trinkets from the Northwest. Having never visited the Northwest, I found these curiosities rather novel and would take them out to fiddle with when idle. Out of courtesy, I wrote him a letter in return. After all, he was my betrothed. His death wouldn't matter much, but if he died, I'd become a widow before even crossing his thresholds, and I had no desire for a chastity memorial arch erected at the capital gates in my name. Several days later, the virtuous consort hosted a plum blossom viewing banquet, inviting various ladies to admire the blooms. When I arrived, I was still rotating a pair of small walnuts in my hand. Then Wei Qing had written that several old gentlemen in the Northwest carried these things, constantly rolling them in their palms, finding it amusing. He'd sent me a pair. The ladies had gradually assembled, with only consorte yet to arrive. Virtuous consort and consorte had always been at odds. Seeing consorte's tardy arrival, virtuous consort began her sarcastic commentary. "Sister consort dead, what grand airs you put on, keeping us all waiting." Consort swayed over, adjusting the pearl ornament in her hair, lips curved in a smile. "Well, His Majesty spent last night in my quarters, you see. Naturally, I'm rather fatigued and overslept a bit." Virtuous consort's expression soured immediately. She snorted coldly. "I wonder what sorcery sister has learned to keep His Majesty so entranced, visiting you nightly. Sister truly has remarkable methods." Consort rolled her eyes disdainfully. With so many sisters in the harem now, how many have already lost their bloom? His Majesty hasn't held selections in years, Jen. Where else would he go but to my quarters? You, virtuous consort's chest heaved with indignation. Having witnessed sufficient drama, I had no interest in composing poetry or engaging in literary contests. I simply wanted to find a quiet spot to rest. Wrapped in thick fox fur, clutching a warming pouch, I slipped away amidst the chaos. After wandering for some time, I spotted a small pavilion and settled myself there, lazily watching the drifting snow. I extended my hand to catch snowflakes when mischief struck. I formed a snowball and, seeing Xiaoju looking about distractedly, hurled it at her. She froze, then tumbled into the snow. Suddenly alarmed, I rushed toward her, Zen, only to take a large snowball directly to the head. I saw Xiaoju now forming another snowball, grinning at me. I planted my hands on my hips and bellowed, "You wretched Xiaoju, daring to deceive me. See how I deal with you." We engaged in a snowball fight, utterly oblivious to our surroundings. My face turned rosy from the wind, but I felt wonderfully happy. Wasn't this far more enjoyable than some poetry gathering? I formed an enormous snowball. Seeing Xiaoju occupied with her own ammunition, I seized the opportunity and launched mine. With a resounding splat, Xiaoju yelped and dodged aside. The snowball struck with perfect accuracy a figure clad in bright imperial yellow. Audacious. The Grand Eunuch barked. The snowball had hit the Emperor. I immediately dropped to my knees. "This subject greets your Majesty and begs forgiveness." The Emperor's face was thunderous. Engaging in horseplay within the palace, Jen, what sort of behavior is this? I felt rather nervous. Xiaoju frantically kowtowed, begging the Emperor's mercy, claiming it was all her idea to have a snowball fight by the pavilion. Seeing Xiaoju's forehead turning purple from her kowtowing, I grew angry. It was clearly his sudden appearance, Jen. Why blame others? I couldn't help but glare up at the Emperor. He seemed amused by my fierce expression, his eyes crinkling before he waved his hand, permitting me to rise. "The death penalty may be waived, but punishment cannot be escaped. Since you've soaked our robes, you must compensate us with a replacement." "What?" I looked utterly baffled. This subject cannot afford such compensation. Perhaps this subject could simply reimburse your Majesty in silver." The Emperor's robes were all custom-made by the Imperial Embroidery Workshops, and every stitch and thread precious beyond measure. The Emperor demanding I replace his garment was absurd. Surely monetary compensation would suffice. The Grand Eunuch rebuked me again. "Audacious! How dare you insult His Majesty? Does His Majesty lack your paltry silver?" I stood there in awkward difficulty when the Emperor's tone shifted. "If you cannot replace the robe, then you shall compensate us with yourself." I immediately protested in alarm. "That is impossible, Your Majesty. I'm ugly and disfigured, uneducated and frivolous, spending my days playing with cats and dogs. Even Father says that without Your Majesty's marriage decree, I'd never find a husband. Moreover, Your Majesty possesses celestial bearing and martial prowess, Dan. I'm utterly unworthy." The Emperor laughed heartily at my self-deprecation. "So in your estimation we are so very excellent. Very well, we won't tease you further, simply accompany us on a walk." With that, the Grand Eunuch suddenly restrained Xiaoju as she attempted to rise, leading her away. My nerves stretched taut. Surely in broad daylight, under heaven's gaze, the Emperor wouldn't attempt anything improper. I clutched my fur cloak tighter. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, I noticed what appeared to be a flash of distaste cross the Emperor's face. "Hey, what is with that expression, you wretched Emperor? Rest assured, your maid is fine. We've had the Grand Eunuch take her for medical treatment. We observed that you seemed somewhat chilled, then this mustn't be taken lightly." He offered detailed reassurance. I kept glancing back at Xiaoju being led away, my heart filled with trepidation. The Emperor suddenly tugged at me. I stumbled, nearly performing a faceplant. Mentally, I cursed the wretched Emperor several times over, wondering how he could be so shameless, dare not even sparing ugly women. We walked on until the Emperor suddenly halted. Lost in thought, I failed to brake in time and collided with his broad back. Just as I began to apologize, he shushed me and pulled me behind a decorative rock formation. I was about to protest when I heard a man and woman's voices. "Why have you come? Don't do this, then someone might discover us." It was consort day. My ears had always been sharp, then I recognized her voice immediately. "I've missed you desperately. These past days, with the Emperor visiting your quarters nightly, this prince has had no opportunity to see you. It seems that with Imperial Brothers' company, you've forgotten this prince's virtues." The man referred to himself as "this prince's gen," clearly some audacious royal. I trembled like a sieve, having stumbled upon such scandalous imperial secrets. The Emperor, however, seemed to think I was cold. He enveloped me in his capacious fur cloak, leaving only my fuzzy head exposed. I shot him sidelong glances, silently lighting a candle for consort whilst pitying the Emperor. At this moment, I felt the Emperor was even more pitiable than myself. Consort whimpered softly. "What are you saying? When the Emperor visits, we merely drink tea and play chess, and he doesn't even touch me." The pair drew closer to our hiding spot. My body tensed rigid, their footsteps nearly upon us. I almost screamed aloud. They suddenly stopped, apparently at the rock formation before ours, from which strange sounds emerged. At that moment, my mind was in chaos. I stared at the Emperor's chest, eyes on nose, nose on heart, mentally chanting prayers for this ordeal to end quickly. I don't know how long passed, and my feet had gone numb, then before the pair finally departed the rock formation. I exhaled in relief, looking up to find the Emperor's face disconcertingly close, regarding me with an ambiguous expression. Worse still, his face drew nearer, and when I lifted my head, I nearly kissed him. My face flushed scarlet. Instinctively, I shoved the Emperor. Realizing what I'd done, my face drained of color. Instead of anger, the Emperor steadied me, his voice husky. "Forgive us, we didn't intend that." I was nearly in tears. I already had a betrothed gen. What did the Emperor think he was doing? What did he take me for? Indeed, as Mother said, not a single man under heaven was any good. Suddenly, a snowflake drifted into my eye, causing involuntary tears. The Emperor, however, grew flustered, immediately releasing me and clumsily wiping at my tears. "Don't cry. It is our fault. We were presumptuous. Please don't cry." I felt speechless, yet continued crying, sobbing as I asked, "Your Majesty won't punish this subject, will you?" The Emperor looked amused. "We won't." Only then did I realize that whilst wiping my tears, he'd pulled off my veil. I began narcissistically wondering whether, having discovered my beauty, he intended to forcibly claim me. Then the wretched Emperor nearly infuriated me to death. "Stop crying. Look at yourself. Zen, you've even produced snot bubbles. You're as ugly as that little black dog we encountered in childhood." I choked on my words, mentally raging. "Can't you see this great beauty before you? I think it is not consort to having an affair, Zen, it is that you're impotent." The wretched Emperor's face darkened immediately. I suddenly clapped my hand over my mouth. Jen, good heavens. How had I spoken my thoughts aloud? "Father, 7th aunt, 8th aunt Sand, I've failed you. I've doomed the 9 familial relations." The Emperor ground his teeth, gripping my wrist fiercely. "Sooner or later, we'll show you whether we're capable or not." The ultimate result was that, in my panic, I accidentally kicked the Emperor. Consequently, during my journey home, I could think of nothing but the extermination of 9 familial relations. I even suffered nightmares for several days, dreaming of my own beheading. I'd completely forgotten about Consort's affair. Recently, due to snow disasters, the Emperor had been extremely busy. We never encountered each other again. Wonderful, then the 9 relations were safe. Yet I frequently saw the triumphant Consort at banquets. Each time I felt stifled, as though something were lodged uncomfortably in my chest. Not until early spring did news arrive from the palace Wei Qing had won a great victory and would return triumphantly in 2 days. For once, I took up embroidery, intending to present him with a sachet upon his return. After all, I'd accepted so many trinkets from him. Yet after all this time, he'd never replied to the letter I'd written. The appointed day arrived quickly. I decided to observe first, arriving early to join the crowds lining the route. The man at the procession's head rode against the light, clad in silver armor. Cheering erupted from both sides of the road. with numerous young ladies even tossing handkerchiefs from second-floor balconies. I watched Wei Qing draw closer, waving my hand frantically. Suddenly, I noticed a woman sharing his mount, the reins held tightly in his grip. Looking more carefully, well, that woman blushing like a baboon's backside was none other than our dear military strategist, Murong. That must be the general. How magnificent. Indeed, and that woman must be the legendary female strategist. What a handsome couple, then so enviable. If only I could accompany the general to war. Dream on. I heard this victory owed much to the female strategist who foresaw the enemy's ambush. Two nearby women gossiped. I quickly hid, terrified of recognition. Yet I'd worried needlessly. Den Wei Qing simply passed before my eyes without a glance. Miss, I told you General Wei and that Wang Qi were involved when His Majesty decreed the marriage. He even tried to refuse. Now embracing in public, Zhen utterly shameless. Xiao Ju spat. I added sarcastically, precisely. And he claimed he only regarded her as a sister. Ha! With the principals departed, there was nothing more to see. I just turned to leave when I collided with someone's chest. Ow! I clutched my head, and why was this person's chest so hard? I looked up, ready to unleash my temper, only to see a familiar face. Xiao Ju beside me could only stammer, You're. The Grand Eunuch immediately covered her mouth, explaining, Indeed, this is our young Master Huang. I smiled ingratiatingly. Young Master Huang, kindly step aside. I must return home. The Emperor acted deaf, not only refusing to let me pass but tugging at my sleeve. Seeing his hand about to reach me, fearing another improper advance, I grabbed Xiao Ju and bolted. As I ran, I glanced back to see the Emperor's twitching mouth. General Wei has arrived. Finally, Zhen Wei Qing passing me. He froze momentarily. My efforts hadn't been wasted, Zhen. I'd been primping since afternoon. Feeling regret now, too late. I was no longer Miss Rowan of the Prime Minister's residence. I was the vengeful returning pretzel Rowan. I clutched the sachet, craning my neck to see what drama would unfold today. Wei Qing had changed into black official robes. He'd grown thinner. He strode forward. This subject greets your majesty. The emperor sat above, beaming, waving magnanimously. Rise quickly. General Wei is a hero of our realm, having conquered 2 northwestern cities for us. Wei Qing cupped his hands, hastily demurring. This subject dares not claim such credit. All depends upon your majesty's wisdom, and it is this subject's fortune and the people's blessing. The emperor laughed heartily. Then what reward does our beloved general desire? Name it, we shall grant it. The emperor's smile seemed to conceal mischief. I suspected he was plotting something wicked. Yet Wei Qing knelt in the hall's center. Your Majesty, this subject has found his heart's desire, love at first sight. I beseech your Majesty to rescind the marriage decree with Prime Minister Ruan's daughter. Instantly, all eyes turned toward father and me. Only Wei Qing kept his head bowed. My heart felt strangely stifled. I resolved that upon returning home, I'd sell off every trinket Wei Qing had sent me. Just before his return, I'd even considered that if he respected me, a marriage of mutual courtesy might be acceptable. At this moment, I still wore that hideous wooden hairpin. Just before Wei Qing's entrance, the princess had mocked me as a country bumpkin, sticking tree branches in my hair. Now, led by the princess, that gaggle of troublemakers regarded me with schadenfreude. I maintained surface composure whilst remaining equally calm within, silently thinking, you lot have no idea what this sister is capable of. The emperor made a show of consideration. This, Prime Minister Rowan, what say you? Father's expression grew grave. Your Majesty, your word is your bond. A gentleman's promise, for General Wei to immediately request you rescind the marriage decree upon his return. This subject finds it inappropriate. The emperor appeared to ponder, his face stern. I stared at Wei Qing expectantly, awaiting the drama's commencement. Yet he kept his head lowered, refusing to look at me, to implement today's love at first sight scheme. I deliberately worn a gossamer thin celestial gown, and nearly frozen solid in that garden zen all for nothing, without even showing him my face properly. Just as I ground my teeth in frustration, I felt a scorching gaze upon me, instinctively looking up. I met the emperor's playful eyes from his elevated seat. Every hair stood on end. What was this about? Why was this wretched emperor staring at me? In a flash of realization, I noticed then the emperor's snow-white fox fur had vanished. A chill shot from my feet to my crown, my mind racing in terror. Could it be just now in the rear garden? Had that grand eunuch stolen the emperor's fur for private use? Then, upon encountering me, draped it over me to frame me. I mentally kicked myself. Why hadn't I examined that cloak's material and style more carefully? Fortunately, most fortunately, finding the cloak too heavy, I'd casually left it on the side hall's couch. Thinking this, I forced composure and returned the emperor's gaze with a hint of smugness. Far from anger, his eyes deepened with amusement. He regarded me meaningfully before beckoning the grand eunuch and whispering instructions. An ominous premonition enveloped me. Sure enough, the emperor lounging on his dragon throne opened his golden mouth, his voice quiet yet commanding. Minister Ruan, the previously noisy hall fell instantly silent. Then so quiet one could hear a fly's wing beats. My old man tremulously emerged from his seat, walked to the hall's center, and dropped to his knees with a resounding thud. This minister is present. The emperor said nothing more, merely gazing at father with that half-mocking expression. The atmosphere congealed, then one could hear a pin drop. I even noticed father's arch-rivals, then the grand tutor and vice minister of personnel, then huddled together, exchanging gleeful glances. Father knelt on the ground, perspiration pouring down his official robes nearly soaked through. I sat below, equally on edge, unable to fathom what this wretched emperor was plotting. Was he targeting my family? Just as the stifling air became unbearable, the emperor suddenly propped his chin on one hand and emitted an utterly inappropriate chuckle. Heh. Today within these palace walls we encountered an old acquaintance not seen for many days. She is, moreover, our life-saving benefactor. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. Minister Ron, how do you suppose we should lavishly reward her? I was utterly bewildered, looking toward father in confusion. Father's body trembled as though suddenly enlightened. The civil and military officials and their families exchanged glances, craning their necks to learn this mysterious old acquaintance's identity. Without a word, father began kowtowing with resounding thuds. Your Majesty, this matter this minister cannot decide. The emperor acted as though he hadn't understood father's refusal, responding irrelevantly. Why such agitation? Minister Ruan, we never said you were our benefactor. He lazily shifted position. It is merely that this benefactor is modest, unwilling to claim credit. As it happens, the Kingdom of Luli recently sent tribute, including many rare treasures. We thought to bestow these all upon our benefactor. Would Minister Ruan be so kind as to deliver them on our behalf? I stole a glance at the emperor, who still wore that half-asleep expression. Having uttered this, he yawned, declared we are fatigued, and rose to depart. He left father still kneeling in the hall's center, motionless as stone. The moment the emperor departed, the hall erupted. Whispers surged like tidal waves, those curious, probing. Even Schadenfreude-filled gazes shot toward us like arrows, as though father had committed some heinous crime. This continued until the grand eunuch, smiling broadly, waved his wrists and the heavy doors opened again, as young eunuchs heaved enormous red wooden chests inside, grunting with effort. Nearly an entire incense stick's duration passed before the procession concluded. When the lids opened, the hall blazed with golden light, pearls and jewels radiating brilliance that nearly blinded my eyes. I stood completely stupefied, mentally screaming. Has this wretched emperor lost his mind? Does the treasury have money to burn? Only then did the grand eunuch descend, personally assist father to his feet, and whisper in his ear. Father's expression underwent a spectacular transformation before settling into a helpless sigh and heavy nod. The gazes within the hall grew even more peculiar. Bold ministers had already begun covertly inquiring where this benefactor was hiding. I suspected this lot could perform face-changings and their expressions more spectacular than any stage performance. News of father returning home with 5 cartloads of treasures spread like wildfire, particularly Maya, the vice minister of personnel's daughter who usually mocked me zen at subsequent gatherings. She subjected me to relentless sarcasm. I calmly cleaned out my ear, treating it as dog barking. This nonchalance infuriated her to stamping her feet, nearly shredding her handkerchief. Rumors ran rampant, claiming father had secretly befriended the emperor's life-saving benefactor. Various factions scrambled to uncover this mysterious figure. Our threshold was nearly trampled flat. However, upon returning home, father behaved most unusually, claiming illness for days and barring the gates. Once recovered, he began leaving at dawn and returning at moonrise, rushing to the palace at first light and dragging himself home only when the moon hung high. When mother inquired, he remained tight-lipped, merely looking perpetually worried. In all my years, I'd never seen the old man in such a state. Whenever he saw me, his sighs grew heavier, as though I was some hot potato. The very next day, urgent reports arrived. The northwestern barbarians had grown restless. The frontier was in crisis. The emperor immediately appointed Wei Qing as commander, to depart forthwith for the northwestern front. Consequently, the wedding scheduled for next month had to be postponed indefinitely. After much deliberation, though this marriage wasn't my choice, Wei Qing was departing to defend the realm. I made a special trip to Lingyan Temple to obtain a protective amulet, intending to present it before his departure as a gesture of goodwill, at least. Learning he was inspecting troops at the suburban training ground, I brought Xiao Ju along. Arriving outside, I spotted Wei Qing from afar with that woman in martial attire, both focused on some military matter. I'd barely stepped forward when guards blocked my path. Military zone. No unauthorized persons, Xiao Ju, indignant, retorted. Open your eyes. This is the Prime Minister's eldest daughter, your general's betrothed. Who are you calling unauthorized? The soldier showed only contempt. Oh, so you're that pampered miss who forcibly separated the general from his true love. Looking at you, all delicate, a gust could knock you over. Best not come seeking attention. Should you suffer injury, we couldn't afford compensation. Having our heads chopped off would be most unjust. You, how dare you? Xiao Ju flushed with rage. I pulled her back, shaking my head, then smiled at the soldier, Zan though veiled. The smile carried chill. If that is the case, we'll wait here for General Wei. Though our dispute wasn't loud, it caught the pair's attention. Wei Qing turned, frowning before speaking to the woman and striding over with her. Zhao, stand down. Who gave you permission for such rudeness? The woman sharply reprimanded the guard, who sullenly lowered his spear, though not before rolling his eyes at us. Xiao Ju trembled with fury. I covertly tugged her, then turned to Wei Qing, my gaze falling on the woman. And this is... Before Wei Qing could introduce her, the woman stepped forward, clasping her fists. Greetings, Miss Ran. I am Murong Wangqi, military strategist under the general's command. She then turned to Wei Qing with a radiant smile, her tone familiar. Ah, Qing. I see Miss Ran has private word. I'll return to the tent. Wei Qing instinctively raised his hand to stop her, his tone urgent. Wangqi, no need to avoid us. Whatever Miss Ran wishes to say, she may speak here. Between you and I, there is no need for formality. My smile froze, the last ember of hope thoroughly doused. Listen to those endearments, Jen. Ah, Qing, Wanqi. Zen truly a pair of lovebirds. So I'd become the villain, breaking up the happy couple. Yet this imperial edict came from the emperor himself. Beyond my power to resist, I too felt helpless. Xiao Ju, seeing my prolonged silence and forced smile, finally couldn't contain her sarcasm. Since that is the case, we shan't intrude. Our miss rose before dawn to obtain a protective amulet for the general, who knew the general already has a beauty at his side. This gesture seems quite superfluous. How pitiful our miss's sincere heart has been wasted. Upon hearing this, Wei Qing's expression darkened. He said sternly, Nonsense. Wangqi is the army's strategic mind. A heroine, then, how can she be compared to ordinary females? Murong Wangqi maintained magnanimity, saying gently, Ah, Qing, don't be angry. It is quite all right. My mouth twitched. Watching these two perform this drama before me was more cloying than any romance novel. I glared at the loose Cao Jiao, Ju, This wretched girl, then why bring up what needn't be mentioned? Xiaoju speaks without thinking. General and military strategist Murong, please don't take offense. I merely happened to pass by. Since the general is occupied, I shan't delay. We'll take our leave. I pulled the still indignant Xiaoju and turned to go. Miss Ran. Wait, Wei Qing suddenly called out. I paused and turned to see Wei Qing extending a hand, asking matter-of-factly, since you obtained it, where is this general's protective amulet? I froze, my gaze sweeping past Murong Wangqi's instantly rigid expression. Inwardly I sneered. I'd thought that though Wei Qing resisted the marriage, he was at least upright. Who knew that with his beloved standing right there, he could still be so fickle? I feigned apologetic regret, patting my sleeve. Oh dear, how unfortunate, General Wei. The journey was rather bumpy, and the amulet seems to have been lost. Since military strategist Murong is here, I'm certain she'll obtain an even better one. Farewell. Turning away. Whilst no one watched, I casually tossed the still warm protective amulet into a nearby haystack like rubbish. Strategic commentary. Awakening threshold approaching. On the day of my palace entry, the Emperor, undeterred by gossip, gave me tremendous face. He dispatched people bearing a 10-lie bridal procession to my home and personally came to collect me in his carriage. Guards surrounded us in layers, keeping gawking commoners at bay. Most absurdly, he summoned Wei Qing to stand guard, claiming it ensured greater safety. The assassination and blade-blocking scenarios from romance novels never materialized. Instead, commoners below spread rumors that I was a fox spirit who, having failed to bewitch Wei Qing, had bewitched the Emperor. The Emperor watched me in full regalia. Grinning like a fox, under Dornrin's scrutiny, I slowly removed the veil I'd worn for years. The noisy scene instantly quieted, followed by a chorus of sharp intakes of breath. Even the young eunuch beside me stood transfixed. Someone murmured, "Truly a fox spirit." The Emperor's eyes flickered, and that person was immediately seized and vanished into the crowd. The Emperor looked thoroughly pleased with himself, shoving aside the young eunuch and drawing me into his embrace by the waist. As though addressing Wei Qing's direction specifically, he announced, "What are you all standing about for? Make your obeisance to the imperial noble consort." A great mass of people promptly dropped to their knees. The entire street echoed with cries of "Long live the Emperor! 10,000 years! Long live the imperial noble consort! 1,000 years!" Having enjoyed sufficient pomp, I ascended the palanquin. The Emperor gripped my hands tightly, gazing into my eyes with utmost seriousness. "Don't be afraid, we shall settle all these rumors and slanders for you." I feigned bashful modesty, lowering my head, though inwardly I felt nothing. Men's words were best taken with a grain of salt, and especially when the man in question was the Emperor. The Emperor continued speaking at length, though I absorbed none of it. I turned my head ostensibly to admire the scenery whilst alleviating awkwardness, only to notice Wei Qing riding alongside the palanquin, his expression utterly dazed. Sensing my gaze, he looked over, meeting only my contorted features. His expression grew even more bewildered. My actual thought was, this swaying is killing me, Zen. I'm getting motion sick. The Emperor, assuming I was distressed about leaving home, gently patted my back in comfort. I couldn't bear it any longer. I hastily grabbed the chamber pot from within the palanquin and Zen retch. The Emperor, however, chose this moment for impropriety, exclaiming, "Surely not. So quickly. Are we to become a father already?" I genuinely wanted to kick him to death. That very night, the Emperor held me in his arms, grinning wickedly. "Run, then. You kept fleeing whenever you saw us. Why aren't you running now?" I blinked, uncomprehending. Seeing my lack of reaction, the Emperor pouted, declaring it no fun. I slapped my thigh decisively. "Come, Your Majesty, let this consort teach you something truly entertaining." The Emperor rubbed his hands together like an eager fly, his face full of anticipation. The following morning, Consort led a delegation of sisters to pay their respect. I dragged my aching body from bed at the crack of dawn, yawning continuously, barely registering their barbed remarks before dozing off entirely. Later, the Emperor arrived after morning court, and before the assembled company, carried me back to bed himself. Thereafter, the Emperor turned my nameplate nightly. Good heavens, He flipped it so frequently that a corner actually chipped off. Initially, external rumors still branded me a fox spirit. After the emperor took some action, the narrative shifted zen. Now I was the emperor's life-saving benefactor, another version of General Wei and military strategist. Murong's tale of salvation repaid with devotion. Not only consort Day, but even virtuous consort sought to unite the harem sisters against me. Supposedly, I was all timidity and compliance. In reality, I struck with decisive force, determined to reform this noxious harem. Two bamboo pong. Virtuous consort extended her hand in that distinctive gesture. Oh my, ha ha ha. Terribly sorry, Zen, I've won on two bamboo before virtuous consort could claim her pong. I'd already won the hand. Consort looked thoroughly reluctant, whining at me, how vexing, you've won again. Within 3 days, a single mahjong set transformed us from enemies to gambling companions. We even neglected to seek the emperor's company. Wasn't mahjong infinitely more enjoyable? We were mid-game when the emperor arrived. Virtuous consort and consort D, seeing the emperor, adopted expressions of delighted surprise. Virtuous consort's gaze practically dripped with longing. Your Majesty, this consort has just prepared white fungus and pear soup in her quarters. Would Your Majesty care to sample it? Your Majesty, this consort has red bean and barley soup. Would Your Majesty visit tonight to try it? Watching these coquettish consorts, I suddenly felt inspired. Pinching my voice into an affected tone, I simpered. Your Majesty, this consort has stewed herself into soup. Would Your Majesty care for a taste? The emperor burst out laughing. Excellent, then we must thoroughly sample this imperial noble consort's soup. During this palace period, whenever banquets were held, I inevitably spotted Wei Qing. He constantly stood at a distance, publicly displaying affection with Murong Wangqi before me until my scalp tingled with discomfort. Watching the pair cavort, I could only think of them as grasshoppers after autumn, then their days were numbered. For I'd uncovered something crucial. Murong Wangqi was Prince Ning's illegitimate daughter, and Wei Qing knew yet concealed this fact. Moreover, Prince Ning seemed to be plotting something significant. Murong Wangqi had repeatedly visited Princess Ning. These small maneuvers had not only alerted the emperor but reached even my ears in the deep palace. Summer arrived swiftly, the heat becoming unbearable. I heard news of a momentous event. The emperor's younger brother, Prince Ning, had died then from excessive indulgence, expiring atop a woman's belly. I clicked my tongue in wonder. The imperial family truly bred eccentrics. The emperor ordered the Internal Affairs Bureau to provide me with abundant ice for cooling. Along with rare fruits, I ate yangmei berries whilst reading romance novels, feeling thoroughly content. Suddenly, someone began shouting outside the palace, Imperial Noble Consort, Imperial Noble Consort. I inquired who dared create such a racket at my gates. Xiao Ju reported it was Consort's personal maid. I ordered her admitted. The maid rushed in and immediately began kowtowing frantically. Imperial Noble Consort, I beg you to save my mistress. I asked what had transpired. She spoke evasively, claiming the emperor had grown angry with Consort Day and bestowed upon her a length of white silk. Hearing this, recalling what father's investigations had uncovered these past days, my eyes flickered. I'd barely reached the doorway when I heard Consort's wild laughter within. Your Majesty, all these years, what difference has there been between my existence and the cold palace? You visited me repeatedly, but only under pressure from my father. It was Prince Ning who cherished and loved me, who made me feel even a trace of warmth. Now that Prince Ning is gone, I have no reason to remain in this world. After a pause, I entered, seeing me Consort laughed maniacally. Accompanying the sovereign is like accompanying a tiger. Imperial Noble Consort, today's outcome for me may well be your fate tomorrow. I smiled faintly. When you first entered the palace, you were already carrying a secret pregnancy. You secretly bore a daughter named Shi, correct, Consort de Froze, then lunged at me like a madwoman. How do you know? I continued calmly. Prince Ning was executed for plotting rebellion, wasn't he? How deeply were you involved? You two believed yourselves so discreet. Yet your personal maid frequently left the palace, then everyone knew. Now you seek death so desperately, then whom are you trying to protect? Consort looked panicked. I don't understand what you're saying. I cared not whether she spoke truthfully. I turned to leave. Shortly after, rustling sounds emerged from within. Consort D has died, the eunuch's announcement rang out. I suddenly felt chill throughout my body. If one day the emperor's favor waned, what would become of me? I needed a child. Following Consort D's death, the emperor publicly attributed it to sudden illness after that storm. The emperor rarely visited the harem, spending most of his time in the imperial study handling state affairs. Not until today, when the emperor hosted a banquet for his ministers, did he summon me. Midway through, feeling nauseated, I wished to step outside for air. I informed the emperor, who instructed the grand eunuch to accompany and care for me, who knew I'd encounter Wei Qing. He appeared somewhat inebriated, freezing upon seeing me. The grand eunuch rebuked him sharply before he slowly performed his obeisance. His face looked gaunt, his manner utterly exhausted. I had no desire for prolonged entanglement and moved to avoid him. He called out, "Wait, imperial noble consort. Next month, I'm to be married." I halted. "Then this palace extends congratulations to the general. Does the general have further business?" He extracted the wooden hairpin from his robes, caressing it. Might the imperial noble consort spare a moment for private conversation? I couldn't be bothered to listen, yet the matter I'd uncovered still left me somewhat incredulous. I fixed Wei Qing's eyes with my gaze, saying, "General Wei, the Wei family has served the nation for 3 generations, every member a loyal martyr. I only hope this legacy won't be destroyed in your hands." Wei Qing looked momentarily panicked. "This subject is terrified. I don't understand what your ladyship means. I came today specifically because I have an urgent matter to report to your ladyship." I regarded him coldly. The harem must not interfere in politics. As an external male, you cannot freely enter the harem. If you have urgent matters, you should petition His Majesty directly. Wei Qing laughed coldly. "Just as Wang Qi said, then you're vain and utterly hypocritical." I looked utterly baffled with that. He yanked the protective amulet from around his neck and hurled it at my feet. I thought him utterly deranged. I kicked the amulet into the pond with one foot. Today's words weren't born of softness toward Wei Qing. I simply remembered old General Wei, beheaded by enemy forces and displayed for 3 days. That old man had once held me, had argued vehemently with father in his study, declaring that even in death he'd die on the battlefield serving his country. Upon my return, the emperor was already drunk. I'd prepared sobering soup and fed it to him. The emperor drained it in one gulp, greedily inhaling my scent, staring at me wordlessly. I looked at the emperor and asked, "What is it, your majesty?" The emperor asked cautiously, "If one day we placed you alone in a dangerous situation, would you resent us?" I froze. "Would your majesty bear to do so?" The emperor suddenly pressed forward, sealing my lips, murmuring, "May bear us a child." A night of spring passion. Wei Qing's wedding day proved to be the day of the palace coup. I'd never imagined Wei Qing would ultimately launch a palace coup because Murong Wangchi sought to avenge her parents. The harem descended into chaos, with reports that external forces had breached the palace. The emperor was nowhere to be found. I prepared to flee the palace, only to have the door burst open. Outside stood the emperor, clad in armor, blood on his face. Breathing heavily, he said, "Mia, I've come for you." I felt somewhat surprised, actually. That night when the emperor questioned me, I'd already known he couldn't possibly take me with him. I simply hadn't expected him to return. Gripping my hand, he carved a bloody path forward. Throughout the journey, numerous guards fell. Eventually, only the 2 of us remained. I stood there in a daze, allowing him to drag me along until I saw Wei Qing in the distance, mounted and wearing wedding robes. Behind him stood a massive army blocking our path. He stared fixedly at us. Beside him, Murong Wangchi wore brocade robes. Seeing the emperor, her face filled with hatred. "Dog Emperor, I've finally found you. If not for you, why would my mother have abandoned me? I should have been a princess, yet because of you, I suffered such hardship. The enmity of murdered parents cannot coexist under the same heaven. Today I'll have you dismembered," I laughed coldly from the side. Murong Wangchi stop your nonsense. Consort could have married Prince Ning back then. She refused to accompany him to that desolate frontier, unwilling to abandon the palace's boundless wealth, then that is why she abandoned you. What has this to do with His Majesty? The Emperor also sneered. You're merely a bastard child. That we've allowed you to survive until today demonstrates our benevolence. Prince Ning appeared dissolute on the surface but harbored vast ambitions, having long colluded with foreign tribes. Previously on the battlefield, how did you know in advance about the enemy's ambush? Do you think we truly remained ignorant? Murong Wangqi seemed to suffer a mental break, shrieking for Wei Qing to kill the emperor. Wei Qing dismounted, drew his sword and advanced toward the emperor. He pointed his blade at the emperor. I pulled the emperor behind me. Wei Qing regarded me coldly. Step aside or I'll kill you as well. Wei Qing's sword thrust forward. We had nowhere to retreat, bracing ourselves for death. I was still reproaching the emperor. Why did you have to return? If you hadn't returned, they couldn't have captured you. How could we have reached this point? The emperor smiled faintly. Maya, I have no regrets. If given another chance, I'd make the same choice. My eyes brimmed with tears, just as I believed we were doomed. A whistling sound cut through the air. Wei Qing's sword shattered. Father arrived leading troops. Surrounding Wei Qing's forces, Father erupted in fury. Wei Qing, you beast. The Wei family has been loyal for generations, every member dying for the nation, leaving only you. Old General Wei fought his entire life, and that final campaign's end he was betrayed by a traitor within the ranks. He ended up beheaded and displayed for 3 days at the city gates. It was His Majesty who personally led the campaign to retrieve old General Wei's head. Yet you, for the sake of a bastard child, have destroyed the Wei family legacy. When you face old General Wei in the afterlife, he'll surely beat you to death. You unfilial wretch. Wei Qing's eyes reddened as he roared. Impossible. How could there have been a traitor in the rank? Prince Ning clearly told me it was the emperor who feared our achievements overshadowing his authority. So he sent my father to war and used schemes to ensure his death on the battlefield. The emperor scoffed. Wei Qing, did you leave your brains on the battlefield? When foreign tribes invaded and the people suffered, old General Wei came to the palace late at night, begging us to send him to investigate why the army repeatedly lost. Prince Ning colluded with foreign tribes, then the traitor in the ranks was connected to Prince Ning. However muddled we might be, we'd never gamble with the realm's fate. The Son of Heaven guards the nation's gates. The sovereign dies for the state. This has been our dynasty's creed for generations. How could we possibly harm loyal subjects? Father and numerous veteran ministers corroborated this. Murong Wangqi panicked. Ah, Qing, they're lying to you, don't believe them. Have you forgotten how your father died? Murong Wangqi continued her incessant prattle, but judging by Wei Qing's expression, he'd already wavered, his sword hand trembling. I regarded the red-eyed Wei Qing coldly. Even if you harbored doubts, couldn't you investigate yourself? You're always like this, believing whatever others tell you, lacking any ability to discern truth from falsehood. How can you possibly serve as our realm's great general? I'm truly ashamed on your behalf, and the common people deserve better. With a clang, Wei Qing collapsed to the ground, clutching his head. Murong Wangqi still struggled. Wei Qing, you useless fool, men, kill them. Kill the emperor and that wretched woman. I'll reward you handsomely. The tide had turned. The rebel soldiers dared not move. Father rushed over, ordering Wei Qing bound. Seeing Father and me unharmed, merely with disheveled clothing, he exhaled in relief. Murong Wangqi continued her tirade, claiming she was the most noble woman. She'd become utterly obsessed following that rebellion, in consideration of the Wei family's generations of loyal service. Wei Qing's life was spared, then he was merely demoted to commoner status. Murong Wangqi, however, received the ultimate punishment. Various ministers who'd participated in the rebellion had their homes raided, titles stripped, and were executed along with their 9 familial relations. Another ordinary day arrived. After morning court, the emperor rushed over, looking thoroughly aggrieved and seeking comfort. He complained that the court historians bullied him, constantly preventing him from doing this or that, even criticizing his failure to distribute rain and dew evenly. Indeed, aside from me, the harem existed in name only, provoking considerable discontent throughout the palace. Rumors spread that the emperor treasured me like a precious jewel, and I would become the future empress. One day, during morning court, the emperor announced his intention to establish me as empress. The vice minister immediately led the opposition, claiming I was jealous, preventing the emperor from visiting other consorts' quarters, monopolizing his majesty daily. If I became empress, he'd dash his brains out against a pillar on the spot. The emperor pursed his lips and told him not to wait, then he should do it now. The vice minister fainted on the spot. The emperor further declared that henceforth no more selections would be held. If they wished to select consorts, they could select them for themselves. This imperial pronouncement shocked court and countryside alike. Even father sent a letter inquiring whether I'd fed the emperor some bewitching potion. I rubbed my temples, suddenly feeling nauseated. Xiaoju looked at me with concern and summoned the imperial physician. Subsequently, news of my pregnancy spread throughout the streets and alleys. The emperor acted like a complete fool, holding me and shouting, "We're going to be a father. We're going to be a father." I too felt overjoyed. With this child, I'd have security. My pregnancy symptoms proved severe. Yet the emperor still spent every night in my quarters caring for me. He even discussed future plans if the child was male. He'd establish him as crown prince if female. As eldest princess, I hastily knelt to express gratitude. He grew displeased, forbidding me from ever kneeling again. This particular day was the Mid-Autumn Festival. Late at night, heavily pregnant, I munched on mooncakes. The emperor acted mysteriously, saying he wanted to take me somewhere. He brought me to the highest point in the imperial city. From here, one could view the entire capital's night scenery. Every household had lit sky lanterns. For a time, aside from stars, the sky held these warm, glowing lanterns, forming a river of stars. The emperor's eyes reflected countless candlelight points. He held me close, saying nothing. I turned my head to look at the emperor, noticing he'd acquired a white hair. Perhaps influenced by the atmosphere, for the first time, I voluntarily took his hand, whatever the future held. At this moment, I was willing to stand with him, overlooking this prosperous age.
Value reassessment, precise control of information asymmetry, proactive reconstruction of identity value, and profound understanding of power's rules. She never attempted to emotionally manipulate anyone, consistently positioning herself as player rather than piece. If you appreciate this cold aesthetic narrative style, if you too believe true satisfaction derives from intellectual dominance rather than emotional catharsis, then please follow my next story. I am Maggie Liu.